Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.
Hello, this is Women Up Radio, supporting Empower Women. And today we're talking about young women as change makers and how we can shape our future by advocating and sharing the best of our cultures, values and beliefs. I'm joined in the studio by my guest, Zerbanoo Gifford, author, human rights campaigner, change maker, philanthropist, and founder of the wonderful ASHA Foundation and Centre for Youth Empowerment and Social Transformation. So, welcome to the programme, Zerbanoo.
Well, thank you so much, Anna, for a lovely introduction and for giving me this opportunity to talk to so many women associated with your programme.
Oh, it's lovely.
Thank you.
The pleasure is really all ours.
Thank you.
Can I start by speaking about your experience and your dedication to reform, to progress and to change are legendary, and they really shine the light on some truly appalling situations, particularly for women. So how did you become involved, and what kept you going through the challenges and some of the very tough times along the way?
I think, Anna, it started very early in life. I learned I could help others change the world, and I became involved in challenging, in changing the status quo, which I saw as unjust and unfair to the majority of people. It started very young. My parents ran a hotel in central London, and I used to be living with my grandmother in India while they came to Britain to start a new life. And I joined them as a young girl because my parents were always so busy. We never ever had a holiday together. We were always working in the family business.
Yes.
And every summer holidays, I would go back to India, to Pune, which is not very far from Mumbai.
Yes.
And I witnessed as a young child the poverty of children just destitute on the roads, starving to death.
Yeah.
And I decided that I could do something about it. So when I came back home, I made little flags and I stood outside the hotel, and my parents didn't stop me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of parents today would stop their children standing on the road and asking strangers for money. And I remember I collected £10. I was a little, very young girl, and I sent it to the then Prime Minister of India, Pandit Nehru.
Yeah.
And to everybody's surprise, he wrote me a handwritten letter thanking me and saying that if every girl in England generous like myself, then there would be little poverty in Pune. And I realized very early on that even a little action of mine could make a difference.
Yes.
And I think he was a real statesman. I mean, often, having been a politician myself, I wonder how many politicians today would write to an unknown girl across the world and encourage her to do good. Maybe if there was a photo opportunity, they might do, but they certainly wouldn't do it like he did it. And that had an impact on me.
Yeah.
And I think the second thing that had an impact on me as a young girl, I went with my grandmother around the southern states of America in the early 50s when there was terrible segregation.
Yes.
And we were on a Greyhound bus. And I remember that wherever we stopped, I would see the blacks get off and go to different toilets, different restaurants, even drinking fountains. And I felt I needed to have solidarity with them, even at that young age. I knew it was wrong. And it was wrong that they sat at the back of the bus. And I remember my grandmother was very nervous. She was Indian and she was very timid, and she felt that, we should stick by the law. And the law said that we should sit in the front with the whites.
Oh.
And I refused. I said, you sit where you want to sit. I'm sitting with them.
Oh.
And that impacted, I think, later in life, my work against the racist regime in South Africa. And again, I was fortunate to have a family that allowed me not to hide my personality. They didn't crush me.
Yes.
They just let me do what they thought was good and right. And I think that's very important. And the reason I think it's important is because later on in life, my eldest son, on a weekly basis, used to go and feed the homeless in central London.
Yeah.
And I remember one evening, I got very sort of narky with him. and said, look, Mark, I think you should be studying for your exams and not feeding the homeless. You've got your law exams coming up. And I remember he looked at me really shocked and said, Mum, would your parents have said that to you? And I thought, no, I was so fortunate. They just let me do what I needed to do.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that's very important. And then, of course, getting into politics was quite an eye-opener for me. I really did face some dreadful times. I was a young mother and I made political history getting elected as an Asian woman, but the detractors, and especially the BNP, were just vile. I mean, they were bully boys, and they broke into our house and threatened to kidnap the children and smashed up the car. And wherever I went canvassing, there would be whole gangs of them following me, even when the television cameras were there, and would spit on me and call me a blackie and supporting blackies and things. And it was just dreadful. And I remember my father saying to me, because at one stage I said, look, do you think I should carry on? Because I've got young boys. Yeah. And it was a terrible strain on the whole family. Both my husband and my father said that they felt that if I gave up, I would actually be disadvantaging a whole generation of members of the ethnic minority from coming forward in public life. Yes. Because they would see that it was so terrifying.
Yes.
And that it didn't really matter if I won or lost or whatever happened. It was just being visible and audible and standing up against, thugs.
Yes.
Racist thugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I found the interesting thing about them was that when they did telephone me, and it used to be so constant and it was always tapped by the police, I remember one very clear telephone call to me where the man was yelling down the phone, but that I hadn't fought in the war. So I explained to him that I was, just born after the war, and that my uncle had fought in the war, and the huge contribution made by the Asian community to the war effort.
Yeah.
And he listened to me, and then I spoke to him about Noor Inayat Khan, who was a Muslim woman who was Britain's last radio operator in France, and how she had been killed in Dachau fighting the fascists. And he said to me, it was fascinating, he said, but I never knew that. And I said, yes. I said, your education has let you down, hasn't it? And he said, yes, we've been let down. We don't know things like that.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, it was the education system has not taught them the contribution of minorities, and it's not actually also given them any attention. And therefore they too feel excluded and threatened.
Yes.
And it was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah. Things like that, I think, it's amazing. It's amazing the discrimination that people have for race as well as for men, women, women moving forward. And a lot of the time it's because they've never been told anything else. And I think this is one of the things that I find so important, is you need to educate from when children, basically, so that they can develop much more open-mindedness, but they can also develop objectivity. But in fact, that leads me on to another question. What do you think, particularly concerning women and discrimination, what areas do you think have progressed the most over the last 40 years or so?
Well, certainly politics. Yeah. I mean, remarkably. I mean, today we have a woman prime minister, a woman who leads the DUP in Northern Ireland, Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, Leanne Woods in Wales, Caroline Lucas, the Greens, the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, and her counterpart, Cressida Dick, is running the Met and every field. I mean, just this week I was in the Supreme Court, and there's one of the Supreme Court judges is Brenda Hale. Yeah. I mean, 40 years ago, that wasn't possible.
Yes.
And it was only possible for a very few, very distinguished women. It wasn't open, and masses of changes happened because of campaigning, and because, women of my generation have stuck their necks out and really campaigned for equality in the political system. I mean, I remember when I went for my first interview, I was told very, very clearly that no Asian woman could ever win a political seat. And I said, really? And then one man, and he was a politician, so it wasn't some sort of person off the road, said to me, does your husband know you're here at this meeting?
Oh, really?
And I remember answering and saying, does your wife know you're here? I mean, if a politician spoke like that today, they would be hounded out. I mean, they couldn't talk like that anymore.
Yes.
So things have changed, and there is right across all political parties, they realize that they have to have a balanced representation of people in power.
Yes.
I think so. That's one change. I think the second change is the understanding of the importance of the female principle. So people realize that you just can't have one token woman. You've got to have at least a third. You've got to have a proper balanced membership of whatever the committee is or whatever the organization is. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing is, because I've been so involved in the field of development, that many of the international organizations and large charities and philanthropists are realizing that they have to invest in women's education, women's health, because it is the women that are impacting on the communities.
Yes.
So the best way to use their money and their resources is to target women.
Exactly.
And I think this is now very, very evident in the international field.
Yes.
And I think that, we have come a long, long way. I remember my husband used to always say that they should make a cabinet post for me as Minister of Women's Complaints. And I used to laugh and say, we've got a lot of complaining to do. But I must say that things have improved, and maybe very soon, maybe in the next 50 years, people like me will be out of a job. Or let's hope.
That would be good news, yes. And I know also you strongly believe in young women as change makers. So what do you see as being really pivotal to the development of the next generation of women leaders?
I think it's to do with self-confidence. I think they have extraordinary gifts, many women, and that's one of the things that surprised me. When about 10 years ago, I got a Nesta fellowship. Nesta is the National Endowment of Science, Technology and Arts.
Yeah.
And how I used it was to interview over 300 inspirational women from around the world, from 60 countries, and some very distinct things came out from the interviews. And one was that I was surprised that so many of these very high-powered women lacked self-confidence when they were young.
Okay.
And they said that if they had had somebody to mentor them or somebody to spend time to tell them that they were so good, they would have done it quicker. I spent a great deal of time at the Asha Center, where we train young people and we allow them to develop themselves, to give young women the space and the opportunities to become leaders. We give them a platform to shine, and I think that's really important. And also to be relaxed in their own style. Because my generation, we really had to be, inverted commas, honorary men. We dressed to a code. We had to we had to lower our voices. We couldn't show any emotions because we might be thought as hysterical or harridans. Yeah. And there was a sort of code of behavior for us. And I think women are more confident today of being valued and being able to express our innate sense of community and our wish to cooperate with other people, and having creative thinking out of the box, not having to think in the box.
Yeah.
I think people in my generation were a little bit nervous to do that. Yeah. Because we had to fit in.
Yes.
And I think now women don't have to fit in. They're very privileged, I think. And I think the main thing is to trust them that, they will shine.
But if they're racked by doubts about stepping out of the box, about breaking the mold, how can they find the inspiration and the strength to keep going and to follow that route? Because it can be very difficult. I mean, you know yourself from everything you've done that's really out of the box. So for normal people like me, when we have doubts, what would you advise? Where do you think we can find the inspiration?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm not a person that's very enamored with these pumped up super women. I think that I think a bit like nature, we should be a little bit patient with ourselves, and in the right time things happen. Yes. And to really enjoy life. Yeah. I feel that, including myself, we work so hard and we strive so hard, but sometimes we missed out on fun. I mean, I want to tango. I want to learn how to tango. I don't know why. I just love dancing.
Yes.
And recently I was on a book tour in America, and as a surprise gift for me in Washington, I was making a public speech. And then after the speech, they organized for me to learn tango in front of everybody as a way of training people in personal development. And there was this German gentleman and English woman from Bristol, and they were going around America using Argentinian tango to teach us how to be able to work heart to heart. Because most people, they said, dance thinking they have to look into the other person's eyes.
Yes.
But what is important is heart to heart. And I did the dancing like that, and I felt transformed.
Oh, wonderful.
I felt transformed. It was fantastic. And I thought, what a out of the box way to train people in leadership, and I remember saying to the trainer, the dancer, he was fantastic, and he was in the corporate world himself. He was very high up in the corporate world. I said to him, oh, it's so wonderful to have a man leading me so beautifully because it's easier to dance. And he said, it doesn't have to be a man that's a leader. He said, stop saying it's a man.
Yeah.
And I thought, even I've been brainwashed.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's funny how we use terminology even, and it was wonderful. It was an eye opener for me, and I think there must be a lot of ways that we can teach thoughtful leadership, and a new way of doing things, different way of approaching the world.
Yeah.
And this was just such a lovely present for me. You know, it was done personally for me, and what's more lovely than that?
It sounds wonderful.
It was, and one of the other things I do when I train young people is I tell them to write their obituary, and they always get very amused by that because they're young, and they always ask me, you know, what's your obituary? And I said, you can't do more than 2 lines because of people's brain span.
Yeah.
It's got to be very short. And mine is to empower the powerless and to enlighten the powerful. And I say to them, write just 2 sentences or a sentence of what you want to be known for. What is your special gift? What do you feel that you can do? And then on your birthday, look back at that every year. Maybe it's something different. Maybe you've grown. It's holistic. It doesn't have to be the same.
Yeah.
And see whether you've actually contributed to the world in some way.
Yes.
Have you made it a better place? Because I tell them that you will have to meet your maker on the day of judgment.
Yeah.
And your maker will say to you, you know, what have you done? He won't look at your bank account.
Yes.
He will look at the happiness or the joy or the sorrow that you brought other people, and you will have to experience that yourself. So you might as well make sure that you have a good life and that you bring joy to other people. I don't think young people are taught that at school.
No,
they're taught that they've got to be successful, they've got to make money, they've got to get good jobs, they've got to get their degree. But at the end of the day, looking back on life, and now I'm an old lady and I'm a granny, I look back on it and I think, well, what were the turning points? The turning points were people that you'd been kind to or been grateful to, or who through the universe had come to help you, and you'd done something nice for them.
Yes.
And they'd, even if it was 20 years later or 30 years later, turned up and it transformed your life.
Yes. Yeah.
And when people look at life like that, I think it's more enjoyable for everybody.
Definitely. I know. And you once said, one of your quotations, if you need to change paths, you can give yourself permission to just backtrack and try a new, more fulfilling one. And that's something I agree with so much, because fulfillment is so much more important than anything material and what you do for others. But there seems to be too many barriers put in our way by, well, closed-minded individuals or organizations, and they try and block our freedom, or they're closed to the idea of inspiration or creativity for achieving this, whether it's social or professional. So how do you think we can open the doors to a more fulfilling and free-minded future on all levels?
I don't think you can change other people till you yourself are an example and change things. Yeah. So I think that's really important. Yeah. There's too many people who want other people to do things for them or change.
Yeah.
And I remember in politics, I had the privilege, I should say, of taking over the chair of the community relations panel from Lord Avebury. It was a proportional representation vote. So I think that I was the only woman on the committee. And I still believe that every man voted for himself and then voted for me second. And it went to the second ballot and I got chosen as the chair. And I decided that I wanted half the committee to be made up of women and members of the minorities.
Yes.
And I asked the committee, and the committee didn't think it was appropriate because the people I was suggesting didn't have the right CVs. And I explained, how do you get the right CVs unless you're asked to join things?
Exactly.
I mean, how does it happen? You know, it's a chicken and egg situation. So what I did was I used the chairman's action and I dissolved the committee and then co-opted on people I thought would be good. And many of those women today are high flyers.
Oh, wonderful.
So I think if you talk the talk, you have to walk the walk.
Yes.
And do what you say. So if you talk about diversity and you talk about empowerment of women, you've got to make sure that when you have power, you use it.
Yes.
So I think that's number one important.
Yeah.
I think number two is the economic power that women need, because I think often women are stifled and mistreated because they have no economic power.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you another example, I was asked by the elephant family to donate money for the preservation of Indian elephants. And I explained that I really wasn't interested in that, but I would be interested in human-animal conflict. So I went with the director, Ruth Powis, and we went to Dehradun near the Himalayas, and we were taken to the Gujar community. And they were displaced by elephants, and we were given a platform to talk, and they knew that we were coming with money. So the whole area was full of these Muslim gentlemen that were sitting there.
Yeah.
And I asked them, where were the women?
Yeah.
And they said, oh, the women don't come. The women aren't the decision makers. So I said, really? So I said, well, I'm not really interested in who you think is a decision maker.
Yeah.
I want to speak to the women.
Yeah.
So after a lot of argy-bargy, the women were brought into this sort of broken down shack.
Yeah.
And that I had the doors closed, and I asked them what would they want. I mean, I asked them because I don't know what they want. And I said, do you want sewing machines? And they said, we don't sew, we don't want sewing machines. What we want is a mobile clinic that comes at least once a week or once a month to see us. We have no medical help.
Yeah.
And we would like to own a buffalo. So I said, why do you want to own a buffalo? And they said, because the buffalo was the economic power in the community. Whoever owned a buffalo had wealth. So I personally paid for the first buffalo, and I named it Buffalo Bill, and they didn't get the joke, and I couldn't stop laughing. And then I went back to England and I fundraised, and we ensured that every woman who headed a family owned a buffalo. And when we went back to the community 5 years later, the whole power structure had changed.
Oh, really?
Completely changed.
Yeah.
The women were able to talk and come out and be equal with the men because they had economic power. So I think it's really important, you know, I say you can, you know, go to conferences so the buffaloes come home and you can carry on talking about the empowerment of women. But until you actually do it, then nothing happens, nothing changes. It's just talk.
Yeah.
And I really think that to get change, you need involvement and you need to make it happen.
You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
You've campaigned endlessly for human rights, and also you were director of Anti-Slavery International, and you've got so many awards. You got International Woman of the Year Award and the Nehru Centenary Award for humanitarian work and for championing the rights of women and children and minorities. So in the last decade, what advances do you think have been made, and is progress continuing globally, or is it only in certain areas?
I think the main thing that's happened has been the awareness of the problems we face. Yeah. I think because of the media, television, radio, internet, I think people are constantly being made aware of inequalities and disasters and what's happening in the world.
Yeah. So
people are now talking about poverty, they're talking about prejudice, they're talking about global pollution, they're talking about the dreadful inequalities all over the world. And I think that's really important as a first step. So, for Oxfam to put out a leaflet saying, 85 people own the same amount of money as 3.5 billion people. But when you see those figures, you realize there's something very wrong.
Yes.
When the media goes on praising a man in India for building a house that cost the same in billions of dollars as the whole GDP of Somalia, you think, well, this man should be ashamed of himself. I've been involved with the Anti-Slavery International as director, and people don't believe me when I tell them there are more slaves today than ever in the transatlantic slave trade, and there are more children in bonded labor than the population of the UK.
Really?
So people, when you tell people this, and they're the facts from the UN, then people sit up and they realize that there is something wrong, and that they've got to move, and they've got to stop this, because it's just not right. It's not fair, and it's not right. Of course, I mean, there are parts of the world where there's terrible violence against women, and pedophilia, and terrorism, and all the rest of it. But I think it's coming into the open, so people know. Yes. Now, it's up to individuals if they want to change that, if they want to change the status quo, if they want to stop sickening greed, if they want to stop environmental degradation, cruelty to children, and the list goes on and on and on, then they themselves can make an impact. And it's really up to them to do it. And it's happening. I think my generation has really let the world down.
Really?
And yes, I do. I think our value system, our moral compass has gone wrong. Yeah. I think that we valued success, whatever success is, God knows what it is. Yeah. And we valued people making money, and we valued, I think, the wrong things.
Yes.
I think what's really needed is this feeling that together we can change it, and we can collaborate.
Yes.
And that, if there is this kind of cruelty that's going on in many parts of the world to women and children, then we can make our voices heard, and it does make an impact.
Yes.
Believe me, when you write letters and you campaign, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
I remember during the anti-apartheid campaign, we campaigned at the supermarkets to stop buying South African fruits. We campaigned that any bank that was operating in South Africa, we would boycott them. And Barclays really took it very seriously, and it did make a difference. Yeah. It made a lot of difference. So even little actions like boycotting fruits,
yes,
if it's done with the good intentions, and the intentions must be pure, that it does have an impact.
Yeah.
It has a great impact, and the world is a nicer place.
Yes.
The world is a better place. And whenever there is things, I think, that go wrong, I think what is happening is that it awakens people. It energizes people to do the right thing, because yes. I found throughout my life that basically the majority of people are very, very good human beings, and they don't actually know how to express their goodness. And if you give them an opportunity, you see the most remarkable things happen.
Yes. Coming back to you in particular, one of your greatest achievements is the Asha Center and Foundation, which is, yes. from what I understand, it's multicultural, multi-faith, and it's there to overcome prejudices and the biases that exist today by uniting people in understanding, and creating and developing opportunities for youth empowerment and for social transformation. Am I right?
Yes.
Can you tell me more about this, and how and why you created the Asha Center, and the opportunities that it's giving to youth worldwide and to our future?
Well, how I created the Asha Center is a blockbuster, and you will have to read my biography, An Uncensored Life, by Frida Master, which is published by HarperCollins, because it would be impossible to tell you on radio.
Okay.
It was a harrowing experience, absolutely harrowing. I took the Millennium Commission to court because I thought that the way the lottery money was being spent was wrong.
Yes.
We were promised £10 million, and then we were turned down, even though I had spent £500,000 on doing a feasibility study for them.
Yeah.
Which they liked. It was simply because the dome had then gone pear-shaped, and all politicians didn't want anything to do with multicultural, multi-ethnic centers. But I lost the court case.
Mm-hmm.
But the Millennium Commission somehow miraculously found £30 million, and that was earmarked for ethnic minority organizations.
Yes.
And they asked me to reapply, and I did reapply, but I knew, having been a politician, how politicians operate, and I knew that we'd be blackballed. And of course, everybody got some money except for us.
Oh, really?
And that really put steel into me, because then I was more determined that we'd have the vision of the Asha Center.
Yes.
And what the vision is really, and it has transpired, is a sacred place which is extraordinarily beautiful, because I believe in beauty. I don't see why anybody, let alone young people, should be condemned to ugliness. So it's a very beautiful place in the Forest of Dean. And I remember putting in the feasibility study that I wanted at least 3 cherry trees.